Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon Spoilers video. So this is going to be part 3, the last part to the BT06 spoiler roundup because Bandai decided to release all of the spoilers at once. So this is going to be the last part and this is going to be covering the tamers and options that we have left yet to see. Alright, so starting things off with the last tamer that we had yet seen, and that is going to be the new duo pair between Izzy and Joe. So Izzy and Joe is looking to be a pretty decent duo tamer because it has the nice ability where at the start of your turn, if the opponent has 2 or more Digimon in play, then you get to gain 2 memory. So I think this is a really good generic way for Black to be gaining 2 memory because it's not necessarily hard for the opponent to be having 2 or more Digimon in play, so it definitely seems like out of all of the duo pairs, this is definitely one of the easier ones to gain the 2 memory, and boy, Black needs it because Black has been struggling for a while, so I definitely think that this is already looking to be a pretty good tamer, on top of which it has a nice other ability where during the opponent's turn, when one of your Black Digimon is deleted, you can just suspend this tamer to draw 1 card. So this is already looking to be a pretty good secondary ability as well, because it plays around with the decoy mechanic, and that's like the primary way Black wants to have its Digimon be deleted to trigger a lot of their on-delete effects, on top of which this is also still just good in Black blockers, because if you just chump block with one of your blockers, then your blocker is going to get deleted, and then you could rest this tamer to draw 1 card. So I definitely think for a lot of Black decks, this is looking to be a pretty good card, even if you're not playing hard into decoys or blockers. This is still just pretty good, because if the opponent is actively trying to delete your Digimon, then regardless of whatever you're doing, utilizing this tamer to draw a card off of their deletion is still just very, very good. So I definitely think that Izzy and Joe is going to be a very good duo tamer for the color of Black, and I definitely think it's going to be a very played card as a result. Next up, we have Judgement of the Blade. So Judgement of the Blade is looking to be a really good red option card just because it's a very efficient option card to play because it has the low play cost of 1. But what this card is doing is it has the very powerful main ability where one of your Digimon with Hackmon in its name or Royal Knight in its type can attack your opponent's unsuspended Digimon for the turn. So this is really good because we already know that Judgement will be able to DP boost himself and give himself piercing, and with the Hackmon line he'll be able to multi-attack, so this buff will be persistent for the whole turn, so he could just pick off the opponent's Digimon while dealing piercing damage with some really decent DP, on top of whatever other red cards that you're going to be running to pair with him. So just this first part of the ability is really good for that style of deck alone, but you could also think about utilizing this in, let's just say, Omnimon, just because Omnimon is still a Royal Knight. Omnimon also plays with red, so you could reasonably utilize this with Omnimon, and we already know that with Durandamon, we could give Omnimon piercing for a very similar style of ability. So I definitely think this card is really good for just a whole bunch of different decks. You could even think about splashing this into some other decks if you want to try to run some interesting dual color decks. So we know that red and black have some good synergy, so you could pair this up with Genkumon and then have Genkumon attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon with security attack +1. So it'll be really interesting to figure out how to utilize this card and all of the ways this card could be utilized. But on top of the first ability just already doing a lot, it even has a nice security ability where you get to play 1 Digimon from your hand with Sistermon in its name for free, and then you get to add this card to your hand. So not only is this card being able to play Sistermons, but this card also is coming back to your hand, so this card is just looking to be absolutely insane to think about utilizing, and again, obviously it's meant for the Judgement deck, but it could extend to a whole bunch of other stuff just because we also know that the Sistermons still interact with Royal Knights also. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what comes from this card and how this card is utilized. Next up, we have Red Reamer. So Red Reamer is looking to be a pretty decent red option card because it has the play cost of 4 and the main ability of being able to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 6,000 DP or less. And then if the opponent has 3 or more Digimon in play, then you get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 13,000 DP or less instead. So this is looking to be like an absolutely insane red removal card just because already off of the first part of the ability, just deleting attacking something with 6,000 or less. Usually we see that on a option card that costs 6, and this costs 4. And then on top of which, usually all of those that cost 6 will also have some sort of upside, and this card's upside is a lot stronger than a lot of its contemporaries, just because being able to potentially delete a Digimon with 13,000 DP is pretty huge, but the opponent does have to have 3 or more Digimon in play. But based on all of the removal in the game and all of the new board wipes that are being added, I don't necessarily think that's too big of a deal, but the fact that this is looking to be a really powerful option card is a little bit worrisome to me, because there's just too much removal, and as removal gets better, it kind of just pushes certain strategies along, and it really starts limiting the types of cards that you're going to be playing or could play. On top of which, this also has the security ability of activating its main effect, and again, I think this is a little bit problematic just because there's too many removal option cards in the game. So what's stopping somebody from trying to abuse the security ability to activate the main ability for free and just play this a big red removal deck? And that's just pretty obnoxious and toxic for the game, just because it's not exactly the way Digimon is intended to play. So I definitely think while this is a really good card, I do think this is still showing problematic design with how the security mechanic is working and with how removal abilities are getting better and better. But I do think this is a really strong card, and as such, it probably will see some play. Next up, we have Happy Bullet Showering. So Happy Bullet Showering is looking to be another red option card, and this time it has the play cost of 7, and the ability where if you have a Digimon with 3 Musketeers and its type in play, then you get to use this option card regardless of its color requirements. So this is just following on theme with all of the other 3 Musketeer option cards, so it's no surprise to see the last one do the same thing. But what this card is doing is it has the very powerful main ability where you get to delete all of the opponent's Digimon with the lowest DP. So this effect is very similar to Genkumon's, where Genkumon was a when Digivolving effect where it deletes all of them with the lowest play cost. So this is basically doing almost the exact same thing, except it is DP based. So it's no surprise to see that type of effect here utilizing DP, but this is still just a very powerful option card regardless, because similar to Genkumon, if the opponent only has 1 Digimon in play, then if you use this card, you could just straight up delete that 1 Digimon in play. But if they have multiple different Digimon in play with varying stats, then it's only going to be deleting the weakest one. So it's definitely a high risk, high reward card, all depending on when you utilize this card, but it's still just a very powerful removal effect to be playing with regardless, and it has the security ability where you could activate this card's main effect, where even though I'm not super thrilled with another removal card in the game, just because I think the game already has a whole bunch of very powerful removal cards already, this one's a little bit more fair and balanced, just because with the security ability being the way it is, you don't necessarily get to choose which Digimon, and it is definitely a card that's easier to be playing around. But again, it still has a really good risk-reward added to the security ability because of how the main ability works, and I definitely prefer something more like this rather than Red Reamer and some of the other option cards that we've been getting. So I definitely think this is going to be played in the 3 Musketeers deck for sure, but I don't know if this is going to be played in something like a security control deck, where that's been popular recently, both in English and in Japan. So only time will tell to see how others apply this card outside of the 3 Musketeers deck, but obviously if you're playing that 3 Musketeers deck, this is a no-brainer, really good card to be running, just because you already have some other really good cards that can complement this very nicely. Next up, we have Forbidden Trident. So Forbidden Trident is a 1-costed blue option card, and it's looking to be a pretty decent blue option card to be thinking about playing, all depending on the type of deck you are running. So what this card is doing is it has the main ability of one of your Digimon gets plus 2000 DP, and the added ability of when attacking, you get to bounce one of the opponent's level 3 Digimon back to their hand for the turn. It really just depends on the type of blue deck that you're running, because I think this complements the multi-attacking type strategies that blue likes to be playing with, because this when attacking ability isn't once per turn, so you could utilize the buff to persist through all of the swings, and you also get to utilize the when attacking ability multiple times, and again, all depending on the type of deck you're going to be playing, that could be pretty decent. And on top of all of that, it even has the security ability of being able to add itself back to the hand, so that way you could figure out when best to utilize it. So I think this is a pretty decent option card to be running, and I definitely think even though the DP boost isn't as powerful as something like Mad Dog Fire, definitely the utility that it adds with the ability it's giving definitely makes it really good for certain decks. But again, I don't know how highly played this is going to be, if this is even going to get played, just because I don't think that this ability, even though it seems really good, I don't see it triggering more than once or twice. And if you're trying to really utilize multi-attacking more efficiently, then there's just better things that you could be running. Next up, we have Raddle Star. So Raddle Star is a 5-cost blue option card, and basically this is the blue version of Red Reamer. So what this card is doing is it has the main ability of allowing you to return one of the opponent's level 5 or lower Digimon back to their hand. So the big difference is that this ability is actually statted fairly compared to a lot of the other blue cards that are doing something similar. But similar to Red Reamer, it has the added benefit of if your opponent has 3 or more Digimon in play, then you get to return one of the opponent's Digimon to the bottom of their deck instead. So this is still just a very powerful blue removal option card, and it's definitely a really interesting blue removal option card to be playing around with, just because blue hasn't had very efficient removal to begin with. So I don't know exactly if this is going to see play or not, but it's definitely a really interesting option to be thinking about playing, and it even has the nice security ability of being able to activate its main effect. So it'll be interesting to see what people do with this card going forward. Next up, we have Acid Injection. So Acid Injection is a 1-cost yellow option card, and it has the main ability of being able to trash the top card of your security stack. Then one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 5,000 DP for the turn. So this is basically just Manticoremon's when attacking ability slapped on an option, and that's just pretty decent just because for a low play cost, it has some decent DP reduction, so you could utilize this in some very powerful ways. And on top of that, it even has the nice security ability of being able to add itself back to your hand. So between all of the ways that yellow wants to try to remove their own security stack, I definitely think this is a really good way that they could be utilizing that a little bit better than Manticoremon, just because Manticoremon is taking up a Digimon slot. It's definitely a card to be thinking about, all depending on the type of deck and build that you want to be playing. But even at worst, you could pair this up with Manticoremon and basically reduce 2 of your own security to minus 10,000 on one of the opponent's Digimon for very little effort. And yellow has a whole bunch of recovery already and different ways it likes to heal. So I definitely don't think that that's a bad thing to be thinking about doing. So it's definitely interesting to think about how you could best apply this card, and it definitely might see some play as a result. Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention is this does work similarly to Blinding Ray, where the whole point with Blinding Ray is you trash a card from your security to gain 2 memory. So this is doing the same thing but with DP reduction, and if you actually don't have any security to trash, then you still actually do get the minus 5,000 DP, just like how in Blinding Ray, if you don't have any security to trash, you still get the 2 memory just because these are actually separated abilities. So you do have to do the first one, but the second one is not dependent on if the first one triggers. So it's still just a very powerful option card to be thinking about playing just for that type of utility alone on top of all of its other synergies. Next up, we have Wyvern's Breath. So Wyvern's Breath is an 8-costed yellow option card with the main ability of one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 15,000 DP for the turn. And then it has the security ability of activating its main effect. So for all intents and purposes, this is basically the yellow equivalent to Gaia Force right now. So I really think that this card is super strong just because Gaia Force is super strong and they're like almost playing on the same level. But at the same time, I really don't like this card just because I think there's already way too much removal in the game, especially since yellow already has some of the best removal tools in the game currently. And on top of which, yellow also is the color that is prone to be able to abuse the security effect the most and really take advantage and abuse the security mechanic as a whole. So I really do not like this card just because I don't think this card really needed to be made. I understand why it was made, but I don't really like the fact that it is made and it is here. So again, I think this is a really good card. I just personally do not like it just because I think yellow really just didn't need a card like this in the game. Next up, we have Blasted Disaster. So Blasted Disaster is a 6-cost green option card with the main ability of suspending all of the opponent's Digimon. And then you get to gain 1 memory for each of the opponent's suspended Digimon. So this is a pretty decent option to think about playing just because the ability to suspend all of the opponent's Digimon could be relevant depending on the type of matchup you're playing against. So it's a really good tech and counter card to decks that like to go wide. And then the really interesting part is the second ability where you get to gain 1 memory for each of the opponent's suspended Digimon. So even though you could only be suspending 1 or 2 Digimon down, that still makes this card a lot more efficient. But on top of that, even if they have more Digimon that's suspended than what you initially rested, you're still going to be getting the memory for each of the suspended Digimon. So let's just say they have a field of 6 Digimon and only 1 or 2 of them is not suspended, you'll still be gaining the full 6 memory back just because after the first ability, they'll then have 6 Digimon suspended. So it's definitely a really interesting option card, all depending on how you could utilize it and what your matchups are against. But on top of which, it has the security ability of being able to suspend 1 of the opponent's Digimon down. So even at worst in security, it's still going to be suspending 1 of the opponent's Digimon down. So it's just a really interesting card to think about utilizing. I don't know how good this card is going to be in the long run, because most of the time, most decks aren't necessarily trying to build this very wide board state where you're actually going to be gaining a whole bunch of memory for utilizing a card like this. But I digress, and it still could see some really interesting play, all depending on how the meta shapes up. Next up, we have Parabolic Junk. So Parabolic Junk is a 0-costed black option card, and it has the main ability of 1 of your Digimon gains the on delete ability of gaining 2 memory until the end of the opponent's next turn. So this definitely seems like it is the 0-cost option card that is trying to gain black memory, just because we already have those in basically all of the other colors, and I definitely think this is a really good way for black to be utilizing this type of ability, just because of all of the different applications on how black can utilize this. So you could utilize this in, let's just say, a D-Brigade deck to just slap it on a Commandramon and then swing into the opponent's security, have your Commandramon get deleted, and then you'll be gaining the 2 memory. Or if you want to use it a little bit more defensively, you could put this on a Digimon with Decoy or a blocker, so that way you could then utilize this ability during the opponent's turn, because it does last until the end of the opponent's turn. So I definitely really like the ways that black can utilize this, and this is just good for not only just black but a whole bunch of other decks too. So if you want to try splashing this in with some black cards in a different style of deck, then it definitely opens up that possibility, just because it is a really decent ability to be thinking about playing around with, all depending on the type of deck that you want to be building. And then it also has the nice security ability of being able to add itself to your hand. So that is definitely a really good ability to be having, just because then you could figure out when is the best time to utilize a card like this. So I really like this card, and I definitely think this card is going to see some play in a lot of black decks. Next up, we have Iron Fisted Onslaught. So Iron Fisted Onslaught is an 8-costed black option card with the main ability of deleting all of the opponent's Digimon with the highest play cost. So this is obviously supposed to be playing around with the fact that Genkumon is deleting all of the ones with the lowest play cost. So between the two, you could delete a wide array of Digimon, and this is just looking to be a really powerful option card to be playing around with, just because black really didn't have a whole lot of good removal to begin with. So now they have a really good removal card, is definitely nice to see, and it has the nice security ability of activating its main effect, thus adding to its overall playability and usability for a lot of black decks, and more decks than black in general. So this is just, again, another really good removal card to be playing around with that security control type deck, just because there's already a whole bunch of really good security Digimon that black could be playing around with, and with yellow's ability to abuse the recovery and security mechanics, you could definitely try to force this into the security, so it's just another really good card for that style of deck as well. on top of it just being a generically good black removal card. So even though I'm not super thrilled with them adding a whole bunch of removal to the game, I'm a little bit more okay with black finally getting some removal, just because de-digivolve before wasn't really a meaningful way of removing threats off of the opponent's field because it's not removing a Digimon off the field. So now they finally are figuring out a good way to remove Digimon from the player's field, and I definitely like the fact that black is finally catching up to what a lot of the other colors are doing. And so that brings BT06 to a wrap in terms of spoilers. We definitely got a whole bunch of really new and powerful and interesting cards to make a whole bunch more decks with. And I definitely think that red is a huge highlight. I think purple definitely got a huge upgrade. Black for sure got a huge upgrade. And unfortunately, I think that yellow still is looking to be pretty good. And unfortunately for me, green being one of my favorite colors, didn't really get a whole lot of good cards, and green definitely got shafted this set. So, like, they definitely can shaft colors in terms of, like, the levels of support that they're going to be giving. So I really hope going forward they start shafting yellow hard, because I still think that color is still very powerful and very problematic, just on a fundamental level on everything that color is doing. But I'll save that for another video, and I definitely think that what we got in the set as a whole is definitely looking to be very exciting and very powerful. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of the decks that Japan is coming up with, and I'm definitely looking forward to my own experimentation with the set. But for now, that's all I really have for this video. As always, tell me your thoughts on any of the cards spoiled down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.